Something said go.
Yes, sir. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Racing Lanes podcast. I am your host, Rico Muhammad. I apologize. I do not have a picture at the moment, but as you can see, our good friend Hank Seaton joins us to kick off the new year. This is the first show of the new year, and Chuck Snow is back from holiday, and we got the gang all together, and we're ready to rock and roll. If you guys and gals would do us a huge, huge favor, please like, share, and subscribe to the show. It helps put us into a bigger and broader algorithm and helps us get out to reach more people. So if you would do that for us, we would greatly appreciate it. With that being said, welcoming in my co-host, Mr. Chuck Snow. And of course, y'all already see the gangs. I'm not even bringing everybody in. They're already up here. But Chuck Snow and Hank Seaton, welcome to the show. Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year.
And Chuck, I guess, Chuck, I'll let you get started and we'll figure out how far down the road we want to talk about this thing as far as new regulatory information is coming down the pipe, so on and so forth.
Well, we got lots of stuff to talk about in the new year. We got a new administration in just about a week, and we've got some new regs probably coming down shortly after, and we are infested with fraud in the trucking and logistics sectors. And I want to talk to our esteemed guest Hank Seaton about this. Hank, good evening, Happy New Year, and what the heck is going on in Washington, D.C.? Can you fill us in?
Well, I can tell you about the level of chaos that the outgoing administration has left us with. And although I don't propose to be a prophet, I can tell you
well, you're definitely not a loss, Hank.
That's figuring out that it's not. Yeah, so in any event, let me start off by saying that hopefully some of the listeners get our kind of monthly regulatory update. If there's anyone that doesn't get it through their trade association or otherwise, if they'll send to either Chuck or Rico your email address and request it. It's easy for me to add it. Once you get it, it's a good month to start because ever since the election chaos, Bedlam broke out, and it was difficult to tell during what they call the lame Congress would pass, and whether or not a lot of last-minute geriatrics would take place. And when it became obvious here last Friday that all of the mischief wouldn't happen, and we'd start with kind of a clean slate with a large number of unfinished items. We're putting out probably our largest analysis of what's happening. So doing this now is probably a good time. And I think our program probably works better if you guys just interrupt. I'm certainly got enough stuff here to cover for a long time. If you want me to, I'll take about 10 minutes and bring us up to date on where we are on the principal issues and mention about a couple of divisive issues.
I think we should start there, and I will interrupt. And one of the things I hope you're going to, one of the topics I hope you're going to touch on this is the explosion that hasn't stopped of fraud.
Of fraud?
Yeah.
The retrospective portion of 40 years, the first time that fraud became a problem in the supply chain was 1985 when we were involved with a 501c for association called the Ad Hoc Committee to End Broker Abuse. And the reason that that was created is because the spot market was just becoming available rather than having limited supply of carriers. There were a lot of people that were trying to get into it.
Right.
The call boards had people that didn't know one another doing business with themselves. And there was a gang that started. It was a gang, we call it the 909 gang because they're out in California, in Glendale. And 40 years later, they're still there.
Yep.
We're dealing with the third generation of the families, and nobody's touched them yet. So along about the Senate required the then ICC to take an inventory of how bad fraud was. And the ICC said, well, we don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
The reason they didn't know anything about it is because they played don't ask, don't tell. And right. So the Senate asked them to come over to my office and take a look at the 45 instances I had. And then while they were working on it, they got disbanded. So the in the congressional wisdom, they were deregulating routes, rates, and services so a small man could compete without having to get authority. But I don't think anybody intended to handicap the new guy and the small man in competing by having him have to deal with fraudsters.
Right.
The new agency quickly transferred over to the FMCSA, and somehow they got all of the regulations that applied to safety and all of the ones that applied to accountability and the role of the broker and the role of carrier, including the record keeping requirements in the same transaction. Somehow they decided that their only North Star was addressing safety. Okay? They said safety was in their middle name and they would not rest until there were no highway accidents involving trucks.
They've gotten a hell of a lot worse.
Noble, but that came in about year 2000, along with a requirement by Congress that they take a close look at what had been in place ever since I started practicing law 50 years ago. It's called the Safety Fitness Protocol, and it is a way that in the U.S., carriers are supposed to be judged as safe to operate. Well, they were told to modify that. And in the past 25 years of their existence, they haven't done it. They've not promulgated any new rules.
Just more.
What they did decided that without rulemaking approval or without really looking at an objective audit, they would use their state safety folks to make a list of carriers. Two things. First of all, the roadside inspections, and secondly, the crash ratios. And then with some mathematical mumbo jumbo that they would be able to issue safety ratings based upon the results.
Right.
The problem with that was very quickly you started looking at it, and most of the carriers who were small didn't have enough data to even measure statistically. I make the analysis to that. Nobody who gambles has ever questioned it. That if you go and put all of your money on one roll of the die, you're going to be very disappointed because the law of small numbers says that if you play enough, the house is going to win.
Always.
So that very simple theory is called the large of small, large numbers. And it meant that the big guys, especially with pre-pass, really wouldn't be in jeopardy the way the little guys were.
Right.
So as a result of that, we sued them and said that the thing wasn't ready to be published they agreed to a redaction statement that said, unless the carrier has been placed out of service or found to be unsatisfactory, it's fit to operate on the nation's roadway. Well, we said, and it was basically true, that that was a disavowal of the ability to use SMS methodology, and somebody had everything. The problem with that was over 96% of the carriers were not given a safety rating.
Right.
They were just say that they were unrated. Well, plaintiff's bar, who's got a hand in this from the beginning, tried to convince the courts that if somebody was unrated, that means that you couldn't use them unless you individually vetted them. Now, you know, as know very well that it ain't your job, and it's not a job that should be foisted on you, because then you're facing what's called the red light, green light.
Right, and this is
which is the idea that, you know, the government is a cop on the block. You don't have to be a vigilante, and you know, you don't have the resources they do. Well, I think that's the mother that created the fraud problem, and it's certainly the mother that created the problem with runaway juries and plaintiffs' bar's delight. The fact that the agency's been sitting here trying to insinuate that the unapproved SMS methodology is gradually being purified somewhere. And, you know, for the past 15 years, I guess, fair part of my practice has been consulting with guys who are sued for nuclear judgments, not only carriers who plaintiffs' bar claims have bad scores, but they're fit to operate, but also everybody up the supply chain. And that's led to higher insurance premiums for small and new carriers. It's led to a reticence on the part of shippers to use a small carrier. It's led to the unfortunate thing that some of the larger brokers have taken the idea of we can deal with that. We can take some big judgments and then tell the shipping public that we're too big to fail. We'll indemnify them. And if somebody has to take the big heist, they can't use the new small broker.
Right.
You know, he don't have the money to indemnify.
That's pretty dangerous to indemnify.
Well, created this.
So let me ask you, Hank, when these large brokers are indemnifying the shipper, are they buying an insurance policy to protect themselves, or are they doing this on their own?
The insurance policies that they can buy are not worth the match that it takes them to like paper. What happens is it is tough enough in the insurance market for a small man to get insurance. He's usually stuck with Progressive.
Yeah, or Great West,
particularly on cargo. But then if you, I mean, you mentioned Great West, they're probably traditionally the best. But with respect to liability, and this is something that should be adhered to, you have to have a BMC endorsement if you are a carrier that says that you have $750,000 worth of insurance, and that the insurer will pay any judgment for physical damage that you incur.
Right.
Okay. So strict enforcement of that means that if you get hit by a truck, you know you got 750 that's ultimately going to be paid if the carrier's liable. if you get hit by a 15-year-old who stole mom's car and is drunk as a coot owl, he may have to have $10,000. So, I mean, the very fact that there is a mandatory insurance requirement for auto liability says something. Now, some states, and would you believe this? There's a group called the Alliance, which is made up of big carriers, and they're taking the position that part of solve the problem will be to increase that minimum insurance requirement to $2 million.
Okay.
Now, think about that. If you increase the amount of the minimum, there will be more money to distribute if there is an accident. But the way insurance works is this. Regardless of the nature of the accident, ultimately, before a case goes to trial, plaintiff's bar will usually make a offer of judgment of the amount of the insurance.
Right.
So if you've got $750,000 and they don't have a very strong case, they'll say, look, we'll take the $175,000, $750,000 and walk away from it. If you do have $2 million, their demand will be $2 million. And the reason that it will go up is because the insurer knows that if the carrier tells him, settle this within policy limits or accept the burden for a runaway judgment, most likely the insurer will say, man, leaving it to the jury is a hell of a risk.
Right, of course.
And they say, well, look, we've spent $500,000 in defense funds doing all of these depositions and all this stuff. But now, hey, Bubba, don't blame me if the jury comes in with $10 million.
Oh yeah, look at that Warner case. Yeah.
Well, so I guess what I'm saying is the result of that increasing the minimum is just putting that much more money on the table that an insurance company is ultimately going to do this about. And
Hank, let me ask you a question. So you've got for our listeners, so you have a motor carrier. He's a single operator. He's got $750,000 worth of insurance. He has a horrible wreck. It's his fault. So the plaintiff's bar agrees on or won't agree on the $750 because damages has been catastrophic, loss of life, et cetera, et cetera. Can they go beyond the insurance policy and pierce the corporate veil, or even go after, let's say it's a driver that owns his own LLC or his own corporation? Can they go after him or her personally and take personal assets? Like, let's say they have that trucking company has a little yard, or the owner of the company owns a house or owns stocks or owns a farm or any of that.
You're talking about what we call piercing the corporate
veil. That's right.
At least in the U.S., and I think it is in Canada too, unless there is some outrageous commingling of funds, a corporate veil will protect the ranch. Now, if I'm Henry Seaton and I'm a part-time truck driver and I have that wreck, then my liability will not stop at the amount of the insurance I have.
Right.
Corporate veil will be pierced.
Right.
And being an unincorporated entity, or even getting to the point that you haven't kept separate books and records, or you've pledged your farm as collateral to guarantee payments on the truck, can mean that, if you got a truck, they're going to try to exercise on that. So one of the things that frustrates the large carriers is they own a whole lot of trucks. They've got a whole lot of assets. They're a deep pocket, and they figure they're safer than the little guy, and that somehow it's unfortunate that the little guy doesn't have the money. And the idea of a little guy saying, well, look, I don't have that much skin in the game. Maybe I better go back to farming, gives him a competitive advantage.
Right.
And, in helping small people get started, I would say that you're best off having a corporation
100%.
rather than an LLC or something that can be a one-member corporation. Just consult with your lawyers so that very carefully you've got the insurance that's required, and that you have what's called Q subs. Q subs is the term that the accountants will help you out with, that allows you to do the kinds of smart legal things that one might consider doing. I'll give you an example. If you're going to have to pledge the farm to secure a loan on a new tractor, okay, you want to be sure that somehow you've got a survival basis so that the plaintiff's bar gets the money that the law requires, but doesn't take the key to the ranch at the same time.
Right.
And in doing that, the typical advice for a large company is they got their operating authority in one corporation.
Right.
They got their broker operation in another corporation. They got a parent company that holds both of those as a subsidiary, and that parent company may also own the real estate.
Right.
And that serves a number of purposes, and it's not to try to evade responsibility for accidents. It's also for estate planning purposes.
Right.
It's also for the possibility of a merger and acquisition.
Of course, because you may get somebody wants your trucks and they don't want your real estate.
Yeah, don't want your trucks, don't want your real estate.
Yeah.
Particularly, is important. And it's still an issue, is the idea that, that old truck terminal has got cleanup costs.
Right.
And ultimately the new guy who's coming in doesn't want the terminal anyway.
Right.
And it's probably got a negative value. So, I mean, the way the buyer wants to buy it, the structure of the thing gives you a whole lot more flexibility. So, I mean, I think that, the large guys, although they've got a whole lot of benefits, see that as a competitive disadvantage. And then, if you think it's unfair that the larger guys have greater exposure, you then start looking with a jaundiced eye at the small carrier, because look, he doesn't have rear-facing cameras. He doesn't have the telemetrics, and so that's what creates this unfortunate tension between the large carriers and the small.
I gotta say, I think it's only a matter of maximum 5 years, and you will not buy insurance anywhere in North America without a forward and rear facing camera. You're just not, because I don't think the insurance companies have an appetite for any more risk with these nuclear settlements. And, I think that last crazy one with Werner in Texas that everybody knows about, I think that was probably the icing on the cake. And I think insurance companies, some of them have lost some of their appetite to insure big rigs going up and down the road.
Well, I mean, everybody has a different opinion of the driver facing camera. Given the fact that plaintiff's bar is going to seek out any little incident that could suggest that the driver was tired.
Oh, yes.
I have seen situations in which the camera, if you turn it back 5 minutes, you'll see that the driver may have rolled down the window, and they'll suggest that was because he was tired and didn't avoid taking a rest because he was late for a delivery. So I guess what I'm saying is, from the point of view of strategy, the idea that there's going to be a net benefit by focusing it on the driver, it's probably going to say, well, they're just going to have more things to bring up.
Right.
You know, if they can't find that you were otherwise negligent, they're going to try to somehow determine that you were sleepy, that you were inattentive, and those kinds of things. So, you know, like you say with that Werner case and other cases, I don't have anything to propose that's better.
No, there is some.
Remote.
Yeah, there's technologies are being worked on. I know Challenger had, they had an experimental thing, and it had to do with cameras, but being able to monitor drivers and it was too expensive, I believe, and it was just a test, monitor how awake drivers were.
Well, I mean, look at it this way. One of the things that is in our plan for advocacy is a general issue, and it is changes in federal and state law that result in excessive cost of operations. Now, when you talk about electronic trucks, a case can be made that they're coming. You might as well embrace them. But in the meantime, the additional cost and what that does to people with older equipment in states where you've got greenhouse issues and all of those kinds of things can certainly ruin productivity and be a cost breaker.
Yeah.
For a used piece of equipment outside a port area. He's not looking for something that's a new truck. He's got a certainly roadworthy old truck. He's not being picked up for it. But now they're going to come in and say it can't get into California. You know, that kind of problem, and the fact that a lot of blue states are broke and are looking for taxes means that we're balkanizing our country to the point that you can't cross a state line without having to meet a different standard. And I think you guys have it in a different way. Your provinces are a little more independent, but down here we have what's called the Commerce Clause, and the ultimate decision on uniform transportation things belongs with the feds.
Yeah, so, here every province has different weight laws and axle laws, and there's 10 different sets of rules. Let me ask you a question. As a lawyer, have you come across with any of your cases where there's been a crash where plaintiff bar jumped on the fact that a truck was old in order to work a jury's emotions that a truck might be 30 years old?
Have I seen what again? I didn't hear you.
Well, as in your cases that you've worked with crashes, and you've had to go in front of a jury when a truck was older, have you had a case cases where plaintiff's bar got in front of a jury and used the fact that a truck was old to win sympathy of the jury against the carrier that had the accident?
I'm glad you asked that question. Only a very small portion of my practice is involved in actually litigating accidents.
Right.
But because, I am pretty well up on the federal regulations and their use, I have been kind of a consultant asked to offer uh, contrary opinions to what plaintiffs bar attempts to do.
Right.
And the very case you mentioned is one that is going on now. It involves a drayman who hired an owner operator with older equipment.
Right.
And the owner operator got outside. The dray means, of course, it's not going very far.
Right. Local.
The owner operator just needed to get the thing outside the port for about 60 miles a day. But one night the truck broke down, and he pulled the truck over off the side of the 4 lane. He couldn't get anybody to come fix it where it was, so he put out his flashers and went to bed. Some idiot ran right up the end of the trailer off the highway.
Right.
And as a result of that, plaintiff's bar, because the carrier involved is a substantial one. Plaintiff's bar put on 32 witnesses, I think. I think that number may be exaggerated, but it was a large number of witnesses that, tried to do accident reconstruction and all of this stuff. And the court let all of that in. But one of the witnesses was very precise in terms of saying that the company had a higher out of service ratio for equipment than was the normal. Now, you would probably expect an out of service ratio to be higher for a dray carrier for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're pulling steamship line containers, which
we all know what the chassis are like. Their
chassis are awful. Number two, they're easy pickings coming in and out of the port for state boys who want to keep their value to the state up with the number of tickets they write. So,
right.
I mean, they're basically profiled, all right? So, I mean, they got 2 lines behind them. And then they want to do just what you say to the jury, and they bring on these witnesses that, talk about SMS scores.
Right.
Well, the interesting thing about this carrier is he's being sued for $34 million.
Whoa.
And I don't know where they got that. I mean, this guy wasn't Liberace or anybody, that the world's gonna miss. But that's the demand. And the sad part about it is that the carrier has had a satisfactory safety rating for 20 years.
Wow.
They're after him. They're after them because they say, well, they're high on their SMS scores, but when you look at the SMS scores, it disproves that they're valid because every couple of years under the SMS scores, because they're high in vehicle maintenance, the agency comes out and looks at them.
Right.
And when they can't find a basis for putting them out of business, they keep their SAT. So if the standard is that the government is responsible for determining who's safe to operate on the nation's roadway,
these guys
that whole thing would be over.
Yeah.
The only reason that plaintiff's bar is spending all this money to go after these people is betting on the fact that they can convince a jury that this guy was unsafe and that somehow the guy didn't have the right to operate older equipment. Wasn't a fact of it not being investigated. Wasn't a fact of having a bad break or anything else causing the wreck. I don't remember that I even know why the thing broke down. But you can see how just in that one case, this whole system becomes a crapshoot, and the real bias is the ability of plaintiff's bar to seize on anything. I had a case. Years ago where I was the owner's rep for a company, and the guy was the carrier was driving home in the fog in Mississippi, and uh, a Mexican worker was going home to San Antonio, and he had four guys in the car, and they were driving in foggy conditions when they ran into the carrier's truck.
And they ran into the back of the truck, I presume.
Ran into the back of it, and what happened? It was in San Antonio, and we went into the room, and it was very easy to tell who was the decedent driver's family because all of his pretty daughters were sitting in their Sunday best in the front row. And at that point, unfortunately, the attorney that was handling it said, I'm really glad you're here because you'll be able to explain to your client why it is that we're certainly concerned that this outcome is not going to be what it should be. And I mean, look, you couldn't have, you'd be heartless if you didn't have sympathy for these. In fact, these little girls lost their daddy.
Yeah.
But from the point of view of carrier who had an excellent safety rating and were a pleasure to work for, this was the worst nightmare.
Of course. And you know what? I've been a consultant, an expert witness on a case similar where there was a loss of life of a young mother who was totally intoxicated with drugs and alcohol, 3 times the amount of alcohol in her system than what is considered impaired. And in the end, the trucker's insurance company still had to pay $600,000 because she had 2 little boys. It was a tragedy, and she was on the wrong side of the road, drunk and stoned. But it's still loss of life.
Well, I mean, I guess I don't have any solution other than the jury system. But what really frustrates me is when you get so-called experts who want to try to defend this Ouija board of SMS as if it were the law, and it just very simply isn't. We can take all night talking about this, but got about 15 minutes. I guess to cap this off, I'd say that there is a need for tort reform.
100%.
They're obviously down here. Clearly, I don't care whether you're a shipper, broker, an insurance company, factor, or what your role is. There needs to be rules of the road to avoid these surprises and the risk of being in trucking. That one accident and you're out of business. The only way to ultimately do that is to take this reptile theory off the table, which is that somehow the shipper or the traveling public or the customer can ultimately be liable for negligent selection. If you follow that to its logical conclusion, if you hire somebody to bring you a load of mulch and he had somebody on the way, maybe you should have checked out the driver's license and 16-year-old that was driving the truck. I mean, at some point, uh, uh, it would lead you to be have to second guess the government.
Yeah, but that's not the shipper's job. That's
No,
what the
it's
head of
not.
government
It's
is.
not. It's not my job to give a breathalyzer to the pilot when I get on the plane.
No, because there's
No,
a
I mean that's part of the reason that we have government police enforcing laws for the benefit of the consumer, and
that's right.
that is just somehow lost in the shuffle here with the plaintiffs bars, and it's interesting, being a lawyer and driving down the street and seeing all of these folks. We get you the settlement you want.
Oh yeah,
Are
it's
you
my
are
blood
you
boil when
me?
I see these.
I've never heard one say that you deserve.
Yes.
No, hey, listen, a couple of things else that I really do want to cover, and that is this fraud issue.
Yes.
Uh, the FMCSA has made clear that it believes it has no authority to prosecute fraud. Okay? They have tried to divert our attention from what they don't do to this proposal that there will be a new application in a modernization act, and that they will be addressing two things. Number one, it'll be electronically prepared so that they say it'll be quicker and simpler. Actually, what they're going to do is lay off individuals who otherwise look at the application. I think
Right.
actually it'll be kind of like the frustrating bane of everybody's existence if you call in and people say press 1 for this, 2 for that, 4 for this, and after they get through 10 or 7 things, they say, if you have any other questions, hold on the line or whatever. The ability just to get to somebody and say, I don't understand. I'm hauling mulch and I got questions here about uh, hazardous materials. I don't know that what's a hazardous material? I mean, just the idea that you'd have somebody who can answer a question would be lost. The application is really very, very cumbersome for a newbie and would probably mean that somebody, regardless of how many years they've driven the truck, would have to hire basically a consultant or a application provider to help them get through the system without getting frustrated. In turn, those providers are not being vetted. They never have been vetted. Most of them are production of people that work on fuel taxes and things like that.
Right, and they branched into. They all of a sudden have
They branch into this by virtue of the fact that the agency will publish them on a list without vetting them, and the list is for agents for service or process. So
Right.
they kind of give that service away to get somewhat FMCSA approval to then go ahead and do what they do. So I guess the question is, they're kind of doubling down on possibility of mischief because as they presented roll this thing out, they said that ultimately these unvetted third parties would also have the key to the ranch because they would be able to go into the system with authorization and make changes. So if you wanted to change the address, you could authorize this third party to do it. And they said that because of that, these third parties would have to be vetted. But now they say, well, we're going to implement this without vetting them and do a whole lot of other things. Somehow this overture has uh, now leaped over the idea of making decisions based upon the Administrative Procedure Act and the requirements of the law. And this thing is coming down the road.
No, Hank, I got to ask you because we're running out of time, but I did need to ask you. Do you, and I know this is maybe it's an unfair question, but do you think we are going to get a whole different uh, set of rules here and with the new administration?
I've tried to be optimistic, okay? Because really, I don't think it could be any worse than it was in the previous administration, particularly on the agenda items at the federal and state level down here, which give no consideration to the importance of the industry. And basically, what I'm talking about is a fascination with we don't want to be involved in prosecution. We want to ignore that program. Ultimately, artificial intelligence is going to solve all of our problems. Uh, if uh, there used to be what I call the Amos theory. If you don't want to do something, screw it up the first time. And, I think that leaves us with the very real issue of saying if the agency doesn't view assisting in prosecutions to be part of its mandate, then we're probably going to have to go to Congress and very simply say, this is a serious problem. The new Congress, hopefully with the changing case law in terms of the ability to put in state law abuses would help. And ultimately, we would get some traction that would say, yes, this fraud is important. Uh, Agency has yet to admit it, but if you're going to process somebody down here for criminal fraud that involves jail time, you got to go through our Department of Justice because the guy's entitled to prosecutors on the other end that are not lay people. And I think if we're going to have any success on that, uh, uh, those of us who are part of the coalition and care about having guard lines are going to have to look at uh, some congressional help to do it. And obviously, that's far more likely now that, we have the advantages of united government. So, uh, I don't really think that our particular issues of fraud are things that uh, the Democratic Party uh, has anything to fear. I think we'll get great Democratic support, but it
Right.
should be more uniform now that we've got better laws, we've got better uh, better access to what we call the Administrative Procedure Act, and define. Uh, if you get this month's analysis and read it, you'll see that so far some of his appointments have been of political folks that probably don't know a tractor from a trailer.
Right.
Some of them, unfortunately, uh, one appointment is of a Republican, but who has shown a very liberal interpretation of the increased cost and all the gee whiz things that will affect people's opportunity. So it's not done. Uh, I think there's some sense that if the other administration had stayed in place uh, for another term, we'd have more difficulty having effective advocacy. So
Yeah.
clearly
No,
on the owner operator issue, that's going to be the
thank
key
God.
issue. On the other ones, particularly safety and fraud, I think our role is to show them that neither one of the current trends will address the issue and actually present a better choice. And Chuck, you were with us uh, at Matt's, and you know the nature of the alternative. And I personally think that objectively it's a much better effective solution, and it involves objective testing and not trying to play Russian roulette with safety, and more importantly, figuring out that we're not going to deal with fraud unless there's a possibility of incarceration for
We
what
need to,
otherwise is recognized embezzlement and fraud. I mean,
you know,
why
yeah,
should trucking end up giving a pass to that when you've got wire fraud and all kinds of other uh, uh, avenues that could be addressed? There's a thing called Rico down here. It's a racketeering act.
right.
Whenever you've got a conspiracy of people to commit embezzlement and those kinds of things, Rico is triggered. It's a whole lot easier to get a prosecution and certainly to demonstrate to the Department of Justice that it's easy
That,
to prosecute. And in
yeah,
that
that's
regard,
how
one of the keys is that you got to have evidence,
right.
and the evidence of fraud is based upon the records that brokers and carriers have to keep of each transaction.
Right.
So all it really should take is for the FMCSA, when they got they're onto somebody, to tell them we're not even going to publish the guy's name. Send them a notice that says you got 24 hours to produce these records. And if they say that the dog ate the records, it's still their burden to prove it.
Yep.
And with their failure to do so, you've got the basis for opening a criminal investigation and turning it over to the FBI. But my biggest problem is they don't even seem to acknowledge in this whole dispute over broker transparency that the very rules themselves are what creates the obligation of a guy who's got both carrier and broker authority to segregate the receivables and not pledge or apothecate money that's owed to the carrier to buy his wife a fur coat.
Right. And that happens.
Or to discharge loans to the company that he's personally guaranteed.
Yeah, because all a broker really, the money that is theirs is the profit.
It's the margin. It's not, and that gets caught up in the fact that advocates seem to want a broker to have to publish that within 24 hours of the shipment move. I don't care a bit about the margin. What I care about is that those documents have to be maintained and can be the source of criminal prosecution. And we'll be making comments to that effect. I think sometimes that although the trade associations are well-meaning, they get cross with one another, and somehow in the middle of the chaos, the real issue is missed.
Well, yeah. The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah, I guess that's the old adage. But as you can see, and listeners, I know there'll be other people that'll chime in. I think we're probably at a crossroads. I mean, it's hard to look at this issue from decades of experience and say that, like you say, notwithstanding the good intention, we've had Congress directives for decades that our bureaucrats haven't been able to act on. And,
Yeah.
trucking's too. Well, I guess we've all got diesel fuel in our nostrils because it's an industry we love. But
Yeah.
let's
That's what it
face
is.
it, if the public got it, a truck brought it, and you know, I'm not willing to acquiesce to drones flying over the house quite yet.
No, that's what that's just not all this stuff. It's great to dream, and I'm sure there's applications for it, but I don't think you're gonna see delivery vans replaced with drones. I think that's silliness. I really do. Doesn't make any sense. Well, I
But
think
we're at 7.
yeah.
That's on my time.
Yeah, we're just about done. Hank, I want to thank you. Rico, are you there, bud? Okay.
I'm here.
I think we're going to wrap it up. We've used enough of Hank's time, and he's been very generous and gracious with it on short notice, especially. And we really appreciate it. Hank, can you tell people how to get hold of you?
Yes. My email address is Henry Seaton, Seaton, written together, at transportationlaw.net. If you want, you can put my name, really, Henry. I'm called Hank, but it's Henry Seaton in the Google Master, and you can get to our firm website. Uh, I guess my pitch would be that we have a steering committee. Both of the hosts here are part of it. They bring different points of view, but we've got 60 to 70 people basically on the steering committee, and what we do for advocacy is people participate on an ad hoc committee. We've got folks that are really concerned about the owner operator issue. It seems as though everybody's concerned to some extent about safety. Uh, we've got niche people that are transporters in vans and sprinters who feel left out of the mix. Chuck, for example, understands that there's a different treatment for commodities, particularly produce, and I don't think sometimes the agency appreciates that. But we try to give voice to niche players in the idea of coming up with some sound regulations. And right now, this last lame duck session just showed how chaotic it really is. So, I wrote a book. It's still pressed. It's called Rules of the Road, and
Survival.
actually, there are not a whole lot of rules of the road that form uh, the guardrails. To not trace the analogy too far, but we're pretty much in the ditch in terms of most of the things that need to go on in rebuilding a sound transportation system. And like you say, without demonizing anybody, there are changes that need to be made. And I think it's some other old adage about if good men do nothing, they kind of get what they deserve. And I think that's where we are. But I do think that a lot of people with what's going on in this world are just falling to their knees and praying because they don't see that things are improving. And I just think that we need to give it a fighting chance.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I can't thank you enough for joining us. If anybody needs to get hold of me, please reach out or put your phone number, send me an email on the email, and send it to chucksnow280 at outlook.com. Again, this is Chuck Snow and Rico Muhammad for the Rates and Lanes podcast. And I want to thank you again, Hank, for joining us tonight.
Sure.
Rico, do you want to give the final summation?
Why not? I just finally actually backed it into a hole for literally. So, but we want to thank Chuck has already said thanks again, Hank, for taking the time out. I apologize I couldn't participate a little bit more tonight. I got some pressing questions, and it sounded like everything that you sounded just real quickly. It sounds more like the big fish is trying to eat up all the little fish.
Yeah, I think from the point of view of a little fish, you can certainly figure that out. I think that the mergers and acquisitions has become big business, and I think it does
Right.
have a stifling effect on small business and entrepreneurship. And that's one thing about trucking that I think we can see not only with folks that want to live in a small town, select when they work and how hard they work, which certainly deserve protection under the National Transportation Policy, and the large number of first generation Americans and immigrants who came here for opportunity.
Yeah.
I think that regardless of the divisive issue of illegal immigrants and all of those things, the strength of our nation has been opportunity and the freedom to choose fitful work to do. And I just I think it's getting harder and harder for the common guy to sustain that. And you could knock me over with a feather when the results of the last election came in. Mr. Trump is an unusual individual. I certainly voted for him, but I wouldn't have laid any money on the fact that he was going to win, or that the blue states, which are traditionally the ones that are hard to. I mean, you can't get through New Jersey without them telling you, have you paid your tax up here? Otherwise, we're going to lock you up. I mean, we just can't live with you being a guy who's willing to get out on the road and operate in 50 states and have 50 different tax returns to file. We just deserve better than that. And frankly, at some point, trucking is a utility. It serves a public purpose. It can't be treated like it's an amusement park.
Yep.
Right. But hey, I didn't want to mean to get you riled back up or nothing like that. I was just, just kind of a quick observation. But thanks again for taking the time out to join us. We definitely greatly appreciate it. It's been far too long since we had you on the show, and that's our fault. We will try to do better. We're trying to get you on
okay.
here a little more
always
frequently.
Enjoyed. I consider you guys good friends.
Well, thank you. Likewise.
We appreciate it so much. And ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you guys that took time out to join us tonight. You could have been anywhere else in the world, but you took some time to hang out with us, and we are always grateful for you doing so. If you would, please tell a friend to tell a friend about the podcast. And until the next time, if you guys and girls would, please stay safe out there, stay healthy, keep it in between the mustard and the mayonnaise, and we'll talk at you same time, same place next week. God bless
Catch
you.
Wait for the mustard and the mayonnaise.
God bless. Take care. Thanks, guys.
Take care, guys.
Take care. God bless.